Thanks, Clive. I'm Rebecca John. You're watching Wales Today. Calls for a major rethink on our approach to drugs after a record number of deaths from misuse here.
I started smoking cannabis really heavy at the age of 15, 16. By 18, I am addicted to heroin or using heroin.
We'll be looking at the new treatments being pioneered here. Noswaith dda, good evening. Wales has recorded the highest number of deaths from drug misuse since records began. The Office for National Statistics found while there were 149 deaths recorded in 2020, it went up to 210 last year. That's the equivalent rate of just over 72 deaths per million people in Wales in 2021, which is above the overall drug death rate in England. Sharon Preet-Kara has been talking to one charity in Wales which says we need to radically rethink our drugs policy.
With the lines in, that's where I used heroin for the first time and crack.
Cullen Mace is taking me on a trip down memory lane. But these aren't happy memories.
Mike, who was passed away in here, who was an alcoholic, Lego in the middle floor, and Lenny as well. That's just 3 in this block, you know. I started smoking cannabis really heavy at the age of 15, 16. By 18, I am addicted to heroin or using heroin. Just, you know, every other week. By the time I'm 19, I'm fully addicted to heroin and using crack cocaine. I'm scrounging every day to make money, stealing off my family, stealing off friends, swindling people. I started becoming a shoplifter, and this is where prison came in.
This was Cullen then, one of many such mugshots from 11 stints in prison. His addiction felt impossible to overcome until he tried a new treatment called Buvidal. Buvidal stops you from feeling the intense symptoms of heroin withdrawal, allowing Cullen to stop craving the drug and change his life for good.
Your confidence comes back, you know, that ambition comes back. You know, the young boy I once was has come back.
The Welsh Government first approved Buvidal in 2019 and its rollout was ramped up in the pandemic. With Wales's drugs deaths at an all-time high, charities say new approaches like this could save lives.
The war on drugs is not an effective way of dealing with these problems. I think what is refreshing from the Welsh Government is we are seeing new ways of working, which I think will start bearing fruit in terms of keeping people alive.
This is naloxone, another of those new ways of working. It's a different injection used to treat overdoses to opiates like heroin. The drug itself is nothing new, but in Wales, it's being delivered by people with real experience of drugs.
I was like stuck in active addiction, so I was going round in circles constantly, getting clean, relapsing, getting clean, relapsing.
Now Leighton's beat that cycle by saving the lives of other heroin users with naloxone.
Puts a smile on your face when you do see the people you've saved, yeah. Someone's son, someone's daughter, someone's father, potentially.
Wales is the first nation in the UK to implement this national peer-to-peer approach.
Typically, we don't see the good in people who use drugs. This project reframes all of that, and what we tell people is that their lived experience absolutely matters, that they've got like a qualification that nobody wants. They've got a street degree, right, and their street degree is involved in pain and trauma.
By September, the project will be rolled out across the whole of Wales, a radical rethink to how we treat addiction that's been backed by the First Minister.
It is about just recognising the reality that there are people whose lives have been, taken over in that way.
He spoke to Cullen on his podcast, a reflection of how far his life has come.
I used to live in here when I was on the run. Every time I used to go on the run from the police and I couldn't go to my parents and my friends, I used to live in this room. I used to stay in this room with a blanket on my own. So to actually manifest this place into something where we've had some great people, some inspiring people, and had some great conversations, it's just extraordinary.
Now Cullen has a girlfriend, a family, a home. All things he traces back to that injection of Buvidal.
Well, an extraordinary story from Cullen, Sharon Preet. But if these new treatments are being rolled out in Wales, why are the drug deaths so high?
Well, Rebecca, the simple answer is time. These initiatives are all quite new and it'll take a bit of time before we can see what effect they'll have. I mean, Buvidal just started to be rolled out during the pandemic, although the early signs are that it's having a really good effect. And when it comes to that peer-to-peer naloxone programme, we'll have to wait until September until it's been spread throughout the whole of Wales. So those success stories that charities are seeing, it might take some time before those filter through to the statistics.
Yeah, so the charities are hearing positive feedback, but how do we know this approach will work?
Well, we can look at two cities, Swansea and Newport, traditionally two Welsh hotspots when it does come to drugs. Now, last year, Swansea recorded over 11 drug deaths per 100,000 in the population. Compare that to Newport, 5 per 100,000. That is a huge postcode lottery. We're talking about double the deaths in Swansea than Newport. Now, I asked the drugs charity Kaleidoscope about that. They pointed out that that peer-to-peer naloxone programme started off in Newport. It's been going for 2 years and saving lives. They also say the approach they're taking in Newport has been a bit different. Rather than criminalising drugs, treating it as a public health issue. Now, they argue that should go even further and that we should be looking at things like heroin prescribing, giving the drug in a safe way to users to prevent them buying it on the street.
And could those ideas happen in Wales?
Well, Rebecca, the issue there is politics. Now, a lot of these powers rest with the UK government. They say that this landmark drug strategy will prevent nearly 1,000 deaths by rebuilding drug treatment services. But many people like Cullen want Wales to stand up and have its own drugs policy. Welsh Government has been spending 63 million a year on projects like Buvidal, but whether it will try and set up its own policy distinct to across the border remains to be seen.
Sharon Preet, thank you.
Drug deaths in the North East related to misuse and poisoning are the highest in the country for the 9th year in a row. New figures show there were 657 deaths in 2021. The disturbing figures come on the back of a police warning that particularly strong drugs have been circulating in Sunderland. Ian Reeve reports.
Sunderland's Southwick area has seen a batch of particularly strong drugs being circulated in recent weeks. A woman in her 30s died and 2 other people became unwell. The death preceded new statistics out today for deaths from drug misuse and poisoning in the North East. There were 255 deaths in 2021 from drug misuse, misuse implying dependence. 402 people died from drug poisoning. The rate of deaths in both cases per million of the population is the highest in England and Wales, and the North East has had the highest rates for the past 9 years. This Director of Public Health in our region says the reasons for the unwanted accolade are varied, but some do jump out.
You know, we have seen a rise in poverty over the last decade. We've seen more people, struggling with the universal credit system. And all of these things, I think, combined mean that there are more likely to be more people misusing substances and therefore more deaths associated with misuse of substances.
The availability of cheaper substances also takes its toll, as does a relatively new way of sourcing drugs.
One of the other things that we have seen more recently is, sort of availability of drugs through, things like the dark web, which makes it much harder for our police colleagues to potentially tackle some of the issues around source.
Some critics of the government also blame a cutting of funding for drug treatment programmes. For its part, though, the government says it has a 10-year plan to reverse the upward trend in drug use, will invest £780 million for addiction treatments. In the North East, the money can't be spent soon enough. Ian Reeve, BBC Look North.
Tonight on Reporting Scotland, there's been a slight fall in drug deaths, but more than 1,300 people still lost their lives to addiction last year. There were 9 fewer deaths compared to 2020, but Scotland still has the highest toll in Europe.
It's the first time it's actually come home to me that I would know one of those statistics. This year it's one of mine, and I hope it's never one of yours.
The Conservatives say the figures are uniquely awful. The Scottish Government says work will continue to address the emergency. Numbers are down, that's the first thing. 9 lives, 9 fewer deaths from drugs misuse, it's something. But today's drug death figures are still the worst in Europe. Here are the numbers. There were 1,330 drug-related deaths last year in Scotland. And there you are, that's down 9 on the previous year. But every one of these numbers was a person, and every death left others grieving. Today, the Scottish Government said the numbers were unacceptable. Katrina Renton has more.
My uncle was riddled with addiction. My granddad, myself, all my nana's brothers and sisters.
Jodie is now 27 years old. From when she was 22, her addiction to heroin and cocaine spiralled out of control. On occasion, she's been given naloxone, a drug that can temporarily reverse overdose effects.
I've had naloxone used on me a few times in the last few years. There's been points where I didn't want naloxone, but there's been times where I've thanked people for naloxone me, because in the times that's where you see the strength.
Jodie became homeless. Now she's being supported by the Simon community in Glasgow.
I'm in recovery, but I'm not recovered because it's a disease that you never fully recover from, because it could take one thing and that's you back out the door again. And a lot of people don't make it once they relapse.
For Liz, today's numbers are very real. She lost her little brother, Tony Devine, in June last year. He was 63. He'd battled with drug addiction for 40 years.
When I heard that they were releasing the statistics, it's the first time it's actually come home to me that I would know one of those statistics. I mean, they're released every year and I've actually not paid much attention to it. This year it's one of mine, and I hope it's never one of yours.
You keep talking, we keep dying.
Today, Liz and her family went to the Scottish Parliament to campaign for greater support for those struggling with addiction.
I feel really bad that I couldn't save him. That's my only regret, is that I couldn't save him from himself.
Justina supports families affected by drugs. She says one death is too many.
Obviously, we all want to see a reduction in the figures, but we're calling this year for a 0 drug deaths target, because we all talk about drug deaths being preventable, and so anything less than a 0 target just seems to be quite insulting to families. We really need to see that emphasis on getting to 0.
For Jodie, this is about so much more than numbers.
I want to break that bias to being a narcissistic. I want people to know that they're not second best, they're first.
Katrina Renton, reporting Scotland.
Our political editor, Glenn Campbell, joins me now. This is obviously a huge human tragedy, Glenn, but it's also a huge political issue.
This is a major political issue, Sally. Drug-related deaths are not new, but they have more than doubled in the years that Nicola Sturgeon has been First Minister. She herself admitted that the Scottish Government had taken its eye off the ball, and it was in January last year that she described the statistics as a national disgrace and announced a national mission to try and tackle the problem. 18 months on, that's certainly not mission accomplished, but it is, looking at the statistics, possible to say that year on year the number of drug-related deaths has not got worse, but it has not really got much better either. And I think you would have to be a very brave commentator to predict, based on the current numbers, that we had turned a corner. The Liberal Democrats are saying the Scottish Government needs to go further and faster in the action it's taking to deal with what Labour describe as utterly shameful statistics, and the Conservatives call a national emergency.
Glenn, what solutions are being proposed? Because that's what people are looking for so desperately.
Well, the Scottish Government is spending an additional £250 million over the 5-year term of the Scottish Parliament. And one of the things that they're prioritising is additional spaces in residential treatment. The Scottish Conservatives want them to go much further and to back a legal right to recovery. The Scottish Government's sympathetic to that, but doesn't want to commit until they are sure that they've got the resources in place to actually deliver on that commitment. The Scottish Government itself is also looking at bringing in treatment for drug users in what they call safe drug consumption facilities, but it's not clear whether they can do that within the current law. Here's a flavour of the debate.
We don't just have the worst drug death rate in the United Kingdom, it's the worst anywhere in Europe. We are 5 times higher in Scotland than in England and Wales, 4 times higher than the next worst nation in Europe. Something has to be done. It has to be done quickly.
Change is happening. We still have a mountain to climb, and I will never deny the challenge that we face. I don't do denial, but I'm absolutely determined that we are going to stick with the national mission, and every day and every week we will do more to save and improve lives.
I know MSPs will be demanding an update from the government here at Holyrood after the summer break. What is clear is that there are no quick fixes to Scotland's drug problem.
Glenn Campbell, thank you very much for joining us.